Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael, on a Tuesday. I am with Dr. Jim Papandrea, author and professor. He is actually in Rome. I'm in Louisiana, but it's raining on both of our ends, interestingly enough. Dr. Jim, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, thanks. I'm doing great, and always great to be on the show. And I just finished a tour in Rome. I had 9 pilgrims here, and I just put them all on the plane and sent them away. And so today's a bit of a day off for me, but it's
Yeah,
raining.
I was.
So what are you gonna do?
Well, I was gonna ask. I mean, what exactly brought you to Rome? I know you've been there for maybe a week or so, but I wasn't exactly sure what it was for. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I regularly do pilgrimages here, and we got a bunch of people coming into the restaurant. I'm actually here right now at my favorite restaurant, which is called Maracuya, and they're letting me do the live stream from here. So hopefully this is going to work out. But
Yeah.
before COVID, I was doing a pilgrimage once a year, usually as a course that I was teaching. So it kind of turns out to be a half history, church history course, half pilgrimage. But as you know, I'm Catholic, but I've carved out a bit of a niche for myself where my students are mostly Protestant. So I just had 9 Protestants here with me, and I was showing them around Rome, and they were a great bunch of people. Some of them had grown up Catholic, right? So they were really connecting with their Catholic roots. The other ones who hadn't were discovering for the first time their ancestors in the faith and the historic church. And we had some great discussions, and it was a great time. So this is what I do. About once a year, I do a pilgrimage like this, ecumenical pilgrimage. But
Mhm.
I'm really trying to emphasize that we all share the same sort of roots of the faith, the same ancestors in the faith. The early church and the church fathers belong to all Christians,
Mhm.
but also I'm reinforcing the message that actually the early church was the Catholic Church. So if you thought it wasn't, you come here and you discover the early church was the Catholic Church, which is, of course, one of the reasons why I came back to the Catholic Church in the first place.
Yeah, I'm curious. What is it like for a Protestant who comes to Rome and just sees all of this history and culture of Catholicism and sees that Catholicism has been around for so long? What is it like for a Protestant to be confronted with that?
Yeah, well, there's you get a lot of different reactions, and they're all sincere, they're all heartfelt. I have had students have a real crisis of faith,
Mm, mhm,
coming here, and others have had a kind of spiritual awakening.
mhm,
Like one of the things we saw this past week is we were in the catacombs of Saint Sebastian, and in that particular catacomb, you can actually stand where the early Christians had their memorial meals, which was the beginning of our feast of the saints, and you can see graffiti on the walls from the 3rd century that say things like "Peter and Paul pray for me," "Peter and Mary pray for me," and so you can see evidence of the very early expressions of the intercession of the saints. So if a Protestant comes here thinking, "Oh, the intercession of the saints," well, that was a thing that was added later. Well, they're gonna that that myth is going to get busted real quick. And
mm.
so there's a lot of experiences like that. And people finally have to sort of admit that, oh, yeah, all of these things that they were told that the Catholics added later, no, they were really there from the beginning. I mean, then they all have to figure out how to deal with that. And, they find their way through it. But it's a great experience. And everybody should come to Rome, you know.
Yeah, have you seen Protestants maybe, end up converting because of experiences like these, being confronted with the reality of church history?
It does happen. It does
Mhm,
happen. A lot of my students tend to be um, Protestants who are either Protestant pastors or they want to be pastors. So that
mhm.
would bring up, the
Yeah,
whole question of vocation for
yeah,
them,
yeah,
which is not just one can of worms, but several cans of worms
sure,
for the
sure.
Protestant world. But yeah, so it's seeds are planted. It's a step in the process.
So where all have you been so far? Where all did you take them? Tell us a little bit about the different places.
We have been everywhere. Of course, we do the Vatican, St. Peter's.
Mhm,
We went down under St. Peter's, and
mhm,
we visited the tomb of St. Peter. And for those who don't know, if you know how to do it, and you make the reservation ahead of time, you can go in the excavations underneath St. Peter's Basilica to where the tomb of Peter still is, and you
mhm.
can see where his bones are. And I always take my people there, and we went there. But for the first time this time, the guide asked me to lead a prayer at the tomb of St. Peter. So I got to lead a prayer at the tomb of St. Peter, which was amazing. And so that was really a great experience. But we go to all the major basilicas, of course. We saw Paul's tomb as well at St. Paul's outside the walls. But then for the most part, I take them into the most ancient Christian sites. A lot of the ones where you have to go into the excavations underneath a church to see what was there before the church was there, where there was a house church or some site of Christian worship going back to the 1st century or the 2nd century or the 3rd century. So we do a lot of things underground, catacombs and excavations, and we're really here to see the earliest expressions of Christianity in the city, which go back all the way to the 1st century.
How far are you from St. Peter's right now? St. Peter's Basilica.
Um, yeah, so I'm kind of on the other end of the city. St. Peter's
Mhm.
Basilica is, the Vatican's kind of on the northwest, and I'm actually at the southeast. I'm by the Coliseum. You can't see it here, but the Forum is right over there, and then the Coliseum is right back there. So I'm on that end of town.
What's probably the most exciting place that you like to take people to whenever you go to Rome?
Well, there's a couple of places that just never get old, and of course, the number one is the Tomb of Peter. That is to me the
Yeah.
holiest place on earth outside of the Holy Land, right? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and then after that, there would be the Church of San Clemente, which is a church with layers. You go into the medieval church, you go through the medieval church down into the excavations, and then you're in a 4th century church, and then you go below that, a couple more layers down, and you're in a 1st century house/warehouse where
Mm.
probably Pope Saint Clement himself celebrated Mass in the 1st century.
Wow.
So just amazing stuff. I mean, we stand on the site where Mass has been celebrated since the 1st century, and we pray there. And we when I have an ecumenical group, we do as much as we can ecumenically. So we don't generally have masses as a part of my
Mhm,
pilgrimages.
mhm.
Come to Rome, I highly recommend that if you're Catholic, go with a pilgrimage where you can have a priest along with you and have masses and stuff like that. But yeah, so those are the most exciting things. Saint Cecilia's same way, underneath
Mm.
the church, 3rd century house of Saint Cecilia. That was a house church in the 3rd century, and we read the stories of the saints, and we see where they're buried, and we just really connect with our ancestors in the faith.
What's the landscape of Catholicism like there, at ground zero?
Yeah, that is a great question. And the funny thing is, you would sort of expect that it's going to be very conservative here in Rome. But Rome has the whole spectrum of Catholic expression. So you've got your rad trads here, you've got your mainstream, and you've got your what I don't know what we. I said this in my email to you. I don't know what to call the other extreme from rad trads.
I call them
Non-trads.
progressives.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
you've got your progressives, and I mean, we've had these conversations before, and we're not naive to the fact that there was a whole wave of progressives that went through seminary in the, let's say, 70s and 80s, who are now in some positions of power here.
Mhm.
So there's definitely progressives in the Vatican, but then there's the traditionals too, and I mean, my feeling is, it's better to maintain the spectrum than to split. Like, schism is always a last resort, always. So, I'd rather have the whole spectrum than have schism. But I mean, I lean more towards the traditionals, So, when you're here, you sort of, believe it or not, you sort of have to seek out your people, right? So let's say you come here and you want to go to mass in English. Well, you've got a few options, right? Because most masses here are in Italian, but then each language group has their places where they can go to mass. So, you know, if you want to go to mass in English, you've got a few options. But when you do your research, you find out, oh, you know, one is for the progressives, one is for, you know, the conservatives, one is so you kind of know, you know, if you're more traditional, you're gonna go to mass at Santo Spirito. If you're more progressive, you're gonna go to mass at St. Patrick's. You know, that's just the way it is.
What is it like, I guess, seeing progressives there in Rome? You would think that they would kind of be confronted with traditional Catholicism and church history, just like the Protestant. And so I just don't see those two things going hand in hand, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, the progressives don't advertise that they're progressive,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
so when you're in a group of people and you've got, you know, and you know, this happens from time to time. Maybe you encounter a priest or someone who's more on the progressive end, and you know, people are talking conservative, and they just kind of smile and nod and go with the flow. I think that you know, they're doing whatever they're doing it behind the scenes. They're not really advertising it.
Yeah, not out in the open.
Yeah.
You know, how do you find a balance between this? Just curious, you know, between your radical traditionalists and then these radical progressives. How do you find a balance there?
I mean, I'm a firm believer that the truth is always in the middle between the extremes. Now, I do lean to the traditional personally, but you know, so if you remember, what was that Paul Simon song? I'd rather be a hammer than a nail, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'd rather be a rad trad than a non-trad or a radical progressive.
Right.
But having said that, I think radical to either extreme is not really the place to be. The place to be is in this place of balance where you know, you're not going to the extremes. And so, like, you know, for me, Latin Mass is great, but it's not the only way to celebrate Mass. Receiving communion on the tongue is great, but it's not the only way to do it. And so that's kind of my balance, you know. And I think probably the most important thing is that those of us who do lean traditional should stick together and not criticize each other. You know, I sometimes I give the rad trads a hard time for being, you know, too radically traditional and too hardcore, but that's only because they're giving us a hard time for being too close to the center. I think we need to stick together so that we're in solidarity, because I mean, the one thing the devil wants most in the church is division, you know.
That's true. What are the Latin masses like there? Are there a lot of Latin masses there in Rome?
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't sought them out, so I don't know. I don't know who's doing Latin Mass here, or if anyone is, because you know, if you think about it, if the Pope is discouraging it, we're awfully close to him here to get away with doing it or to get permission to do it. I don't know. I haven't seen it. It's raining pretty hard here now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can still hear you pretty well.
Okay.
I noticed whenever it rains, it tends to be louder for you than it is for the viewers. So
okay, good. Good.
But I mean, so the Novus Ordo masses, are they pretty good? Are they reverent?
I think so. I mean, but like I said, I know where the one or two churches that I want to go to where Mass is in English, and I know it's going to be a beautiful, reverent Mass where, you know, the priest truly believes in the real presence, and it's all good. In fact, Santo Spirito, where I go to Mass, is the church with the shrine for Divine Mercy. And there's a community of sisters there, and it's just really a beautiful place. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I'm curious, since you're there in Rome, if you had the opportunity to talk to Pope Francis, if you for some reason got to bump into him, what would you say, or what would you ask him? Where would you go?
I would ask Pope Francis. So Which one of my books is your favorite? I'm kidding. No, that's a great question. I honestly don't know. I've never met a pope. I know tons of people who met popes. I know Protestants who have met popes. I've never had the opportunity. I sort of have this fantasy that someday I'll be able to present some of my books to a Holy Father.
Yeah.
And then in my fantasy, of course, he says, "Oh, I already read all these." But I don't know. I don't know what I'd ask Pope Francis. I guess it would probably be something more personal than universal. I think. I would. I might ask him something that would be only for me and not for anyone else. But I don't know. I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, I don't know too. I'm not exactly sure what would be the number one question or number one point that I would bring up to him. A few things come to mind, but I don't know. It's like that's a tough one to pull the trigger on. But there's a good question here from Haley Luya. She says, if you could recommend going to two churches besides St. Peter's in Rome, what two would you recommend going to?
Yeah, well, people often ask me, like, what are the must-see go kinds of things? And in terms of visiting a church to experience the presence of holy ground, I would definitely say San Clemente, St. Clement's. That's the one with all the layers. There's another one that's very beautiful. It's called Santa Prassede, and it has the most amazing mosaics, and it also has the relic of the Holy Column, the little column that Jesus was tied to when he was whipped, and that is there in that church. It was brought here in the Middle Ages from Jerusalem, and so, then there's also the Church of Santa Croce, which is the Church of the Holy Cross, which has relics of the true cross as well. So hard to narrow it down, but there's a lot of places like that.
Yeah. There's another question here. And by the way, y'all can send chat questions for Dr. Jim. Just make sure to put them to @Reason in Theology. So Yvonne is asking, what's the best time of year to go there if you don't like hot weather?
Yeah, so great question. The best months to go here, I think, are May and September. If you don't like hot weather, don't come don't come in June, July, or August. May and September are great. If you like cooler weather, then you could come here in April or October. But November is going to be rainy, and so it's going to be kind of miserable. Spring break is usually pretty rainy too. But believe it or not, January here is beautiful. If you don't mind cold weather, like you get up in the morning and you put on a fleece and it's like in the 50s out usually in January. You can walk around. The only problem with January is you can't go out at night and enjoy it because it'd just be too cold at night. But I've been here in January and that's beautiful too.
Is it pretty easy to get around there? Or do you have to get a lot of Ubers, or is there just a lot of stuff to go to within walking distance?
Well, everything's in walking distance. Rome is small enough that you can walk from one end of the city to the other in, an hour or two, depending on how fast you walk. So everything is walkable. The question is, if the sun is hot and, do you want to walk under the hot sun? But Ubers work pretty well unless it's super crowded. So again, stay away from June. And the metro is pretty safe and reliable. The underground, and they also have buses and trams, which I never ride those, but they work too. So there's plenty of public transportation, and your Uber app will work here just like it does at home. Although, maybe not quite as reliable, but it'll work. And if they can't find you an Uber, the Uber app will call you a cab. So, yeah. And now they have these electric scooters.
Oh, those are helpful. Yeah. I'm curious, as an English speaker who doesn't know Italian,
Say that again?
yeah, as an English speaker who doesn't know Italian, would it be pretty easy to kind of navigate conversations there? Are there a lot of English speakers, or do you kind of have to know a little bit Italian?
Well, it helps to know a little, and I definitely know a little. My Italian is like survival level, but most Romans, excuse me 1 second.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know how to mute this. Most
No, you're
Romans
fine.
speak English better than I speak Italian.
Oh, did we lose you there, Dr. Jim? Okay.
To figure out what you need. Are you? Am
Okay.
I losing you there for a second?
I think we lost you there. If you could just repeat what you just said there.
I said this, the Italians are super friendly and super helpful, and they will work hard to understand you and make it work. So it's not awkward at all. If you don't speak any Italian, come here anyway.
Yeah. What's the food like there?
Oh, it's amazing. The food here is the best. I love Roman food, but they obviously have food from all over Italy here, and
Right.
the only problem with the food here is that after you eat it, you will be ruined for Italian food back in the States. In other words, nothing will compare. So you go home and you're like, oh, I can't get a good, well, you just can't get a good carbonara in the U.S. But anyway, so the food here is amazing. It is almost as good a reason to come here as the faith.
The food. Wow. I have heard that before. I'm curious, have you heard any Latin being spoken, in Vatican City? Is that a common thing, or not really? Most people just speak Italian.
No. I mean, there's an urban myth going around. I don't know, maybe it's true. I've never been able to confirm it, but the story is that the ATM machines in the Vatican are in Latin. I don't know if that's true. But I do know that most business in the Vatican is conducted in Italian, and English is kind of another language that's spoken a lot. And but I don't see anybody speaking Latin. There is that guy Luke Ranieri who does the videos on Latin, and he's got some interesting videos where he comes into the Vatican, just like walks up to a random priest and starts speaking Latin to see if they can converse with him. And the ones who can are like from Mexico and places like that. So so
I've seen a few of those before. Yeah. Somebody was asking about that. Can you speak to them in Latin? I remember seeing a guy trolling them speaking Latin to people in Rome.
That's the guy. Yeah, no, and I don't. My Latin is not conversational at all. I can translate it from a text.
Yeah,
but that's going from Latin into English. Going the other way is harder.
That's true. So, did any non-Catholics convert after having a tour with you?
Not per se. And I think if there were ever any who were ready to, they probably wouldn't have wanted to admit it at that point. But like I was saying earlier, I always have folks who grew up Catholic or who had some of the sacraments who really sort of reconnect with their faith after going on my tours. And and I've had a couple who I hear about later, former students of mine who I hear later came into the Catholic Church. And so I feel like maybe I planted some seeds. And I think, for me, it's enough. I mean, I love it if people convert, but for me, it's enough if they come away from it realizing, the early church really was Catholic. Catholicism is not superstitious. It's not, whatever. It's not ridiculous in whatever way some Protestant may have told them at some point. It's the genuine expression of the faith. And, I mean, a lot of people, not only Protestants, but a lot of people in our modern world will certainly give themselves permission to say, oh, well, now I see that's what the early church was like, but I don't need to be like that. So people will always give themselves permission to think, well, of course, we're so much smarter than the people who lived back then anyway. So, you get that. But no, I think for the most part, my people come away from the trip with a renewed respect for Catholicism and a renewed interest in engaging with it, even if it means they're going to stay Protestant, but they're going to be open to dialogue and common works of mercy with Catholics.
Yeah, yeah. Now you mentioned the Coliseum is behind you.
Yeah.
Do you get a chance to go to the Coliseum often?
Well, we always go to the Coliseum, and the thing about the Coliseum is it's a ruin, right? So it's
Mhm.
it's sort of half broken down. It's very impressive from the outside, but
Yeah,
everybody always wants to go in, and it's becoming more and more difficult to get a ticket to go in. And when
Mhm.
you do, it's so crowded in there that
Yeah,
you can't just sort of wander around at your leisure and explore it. It's really a matter of just trying not to bump into people. So I don't do that thing where I try to bring a group into the Coliseum and then
hmm,
teach them about it while they're in there. I teach them about it before we go in. I give them their ticket and I let them go in on their own and stay in as long as they want. But honestly, if you never went inside the Coliseum, you wouldn't be missing that much.
hmm.
It's just sort of an iconic view from the outside. Inside, it's not that big a deal.
Were there really Christian martyrs in that particular Coliseum?
Yeah, there were. Not in Peter and Paul's day because the Colosseum wasn't built yet.
Hmm.
So after the Great Fire of '64, when Christians in Rome were persecuted and were executed, well, the Colosseum didn't exist yet then. It was finished in about the year 80. But Saint Ignatius of Antioch died in the Colosseum, as well as other Christians at the end of the first century and beginning of the second century. So yeah, it's definitely holy ground in that sense that it's the scene of many martyrdoms.
Yeah, by the way, I heard something a while back. I think this was, I'm looking at it right now, December of 2019. There was some kind of statue that they put at the entrance of the Coliseum of Moloch, the pagan god Moloch. Do you know, have you heard of this before?
No,
No? Okay,
no,
so
I have
I
not.
presume it's not there, or at least visible whenever you go to the Coliseum.
I have not seen any pagan deity statues near the Colosseum at all. No,
Oh,
yeah.
that's good to know. Well, tell me a little bit about the tomb of Jesus. Well, I'm sorry, not the tomb of Jesus. The tomb of Saint Peter. Whenever you um get to go there, are you actually able to see the bones, or are they able to just kind of point you in the direction of where his bones are?
Well, you go down in the excavations and they take you to where the tomb is, which is of course where it always was. But his tomb was originally just kind of a shallow grave
Hmm.
covered with clay tiles.
Hmm.
But they know where it was, and I can explain why, but it has to do with other people trying to be buried near it and stuff like that. And very early on, a monument was built over it.
Hmm.
So anyway, they know where it was, and so they take you underground and you go around like three sides of it, and you
Hmm.
can see, you can look through an excavation point and you can see one of the little columns of the monument. And you go around the other side and you can see, the wall that it was leaning against. And then eventually, when they take you to where you can see his bones have been removed and they're just small fragments. There's not that much left, but they're in a plastic. Well, they're in a plastic case, almost like you'd use for like I don't know if you had a collection of buttons or something, those like plastic cases with all the little squares in them.
Hmm.
So you can see the plastic case, but you can't really see through it. You can't really say, "Oh, I'm looking at a piece of bone right now." You can't really
Hmm.
see it quite that well, but you can see the case. You can see where they are, and they're sort of tucked in, as close to where they originally were as possible after they were analyzed and everything. And all of this is still to this day directly under the main altar at St. Peter's Basilica. So, so there's a direct line from where Peter's grave originally was to where the bones are a little above that now. The main altar and the center of the dome. It's all in a straight line, and the altar has always been right over Peter's tomb.
Did you hear about the altar over Peter's tomb being reconsecrated? I think last week or so.
No,
Was
I
there any
didn't hear about
news?
that.
There was no news about that buzzing in Rome. Yeah, there was. this really odd event where somebody desecrated the altar, and so the cardinal, when the cardinal over the basilica had to reconsecrate it. It was an interesting affair. I didn't know if it was a big deal in Rome itself.
Well, I mean, it might have been, and we just didn't hear about it
Just didn't
because we're
hear
not
about it.
tuned into the
Yeah.
news. Do you know in what way was it desecrated? Or
Yeah, so he was trying to do a message for Ukraine. He put a message on his back saying, "Save the babies of Ukraine," and he stripped and presented himself on the altar in the nude. And he was immediately arrested, and the cardinal reconsecrated it per canon law. It has to be reconsecrated. So that was certainly done. But I didn't know if that was a big event and it was buzzing in Rome or.
well, I will tell you that while we were on the tour, one of the members of my group did like see that on whatever news or social media on their phone.
Yeah.
So I sort of was aware that there was some sort of naked guy with "Save the
Yeah.
Babies" message. I don't know, but I didn't
Yeah.
know that it had anything to do with the
The
altar.
Yeah.
So that would have been the altar that's currently in use because there's underneath there's like two more altars because Peter's tomb is encased in sort of a succession of altars. The original one was actually more of a box monument, but that went all the way back to Emperor Constantine built that one, and then Gregory the Great built around that, and then there was another one built around that, about 1,000 years ago, and then the current one. So
Wow.
So yeah.
I didn't realize there were so many over it. Wow. So religiously stuff is asking, how many churches have you been to in Rome?
I don't know if I could give you a number. I mean,
I imagine there's a lot of them.
There are. I've heard different estimates. I guess, and it depends on how you define the boundaries of Rome.
Yeah.
But there's probably 650 churches in Rome.
Wow.
There's probably 400 churches within the historic city of Rome. I've probably been to, somewhere between 50 and 100 of them.
Wow.
But I keep going back to the same ones because on my tours, I'm always most interested in showing the people the most ancient ones.
That makes sense.
And that, there's a sort of historic list of what we call the ancient title churches, which would be like the earliest churches in Rome that were originally house churches and then were named after a martyr. So, Saint Cecilia, San Clemente. So there's about 25 of those. Some of them are not open to the public anymore, but to the extent that I can, I try to go to all of those and then whatever else I can.
Absurd Scandal asks, have you tried any of the famous Italian risottos yet?
Well, yes, of course. But I'll tell you this. So risotto is like more of a Tuscan dish, right?
Uh-huh.
So my wife is actually meeting me out here tomorrow, and we're going to head up to Assisi. We're going to do our own little pilgrimage in Assisi for a week, and then we're going to go to Florence. And if you love risotto, that's where you get risotto. It's Florence. You get the green pesto risotto. It's amazing. But but again, then you're going to go home and you're going to be like, I can't get good risotto here.
I don't know if I've ever had risotto, but I hear about it all the time from Chef Gordon Ramsay. If you ever watch him, he talks about risotto all the time.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm sure his is great, but
Yeah. So, have you ever attended an Ambrosian rite liturgy? Do they have any of those in
I
Rome?
have not, so I wouldn't know how it's different.
Yeah, I think they only have those in Milan.
I honestly don't know. Although now that the question has been asked, it makes me want to, but I haven't. Yeah.
Sure. Now there's another question. How many days should someone plan their trip for if they want to visit Rome?
Yeah, well, it depends a lot on whether you're content to do just Rome or whether you want to try to also do other places in Italy. Because, a lot of times when I advertise my tours are 2 weeks. And you can easily fill up 2 weeks with just Rome. But then I always get the guy who asks, just Rome? You're not going to Florence or Assisi or whatever? And well, sure, those places are great, but then you need more time. So it kind of depends on how much time you have and whether you think you'll be going back. Because if this is a once in a lifetime trip, then you're going to want to try to maybe hit some more places. But you can easily do 2 weeks in Rome, and Florence you can do in a couple of days. Assisi you can do as a day trip or do in a couple of days. But again, if you want to go to other places, it just depends. And the other thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about coming here is, and I don't know if you can hear it, but Rome is a big city. It is an urban, noisy, busy, trafficy, garbagey, did they pick up the garbage this week? I don't know. But it's beautiful. I love it. I will always love it. And yet right now, after 2 weeks here, I can't wait to get out of Rome and go to where it's quiet and Assisi. So if you're looking for like quiet and peaceful and countryside, you're not going to find that in Rome. Right. You got to go outside of Rome to get that. But Rome is beautiful. The juxtaposition of the ruins and the trees. There's a lot of green in Rome. So it's not all concrete, and so it's very beautiful. But especially in the high tourist season like right now, it's super busy and noisy. So.
Yeah. Now, there's another question here. What was the most fascinating encounter or event that you've had in Rome? Anything particular that comes to mind?
Wow, the most fascinating encounter or event. Well, I've been fortunate to visit the tomb of Peter several times, more than 10 times. I've been at Peter's tomb.
Wow.
And at this, and I was saying on this tour, I got to lead a prayer at the tomb of Peter. So that right there would qualify. I've also been fortunate enough to get into some catacombs that are not open to the public. Oh. So I wrote my dissertation on a particular theologian, and then an archaeologist, art historian friend of mine got me into the catacomb where his tomb is, and I got to visit. His name is Novation, and if you know anything about church history, he's a schismatic but a theologian. Yeah. Anyway, I got to see his tomb, but normally people don't get to go there. So I've gotten to do a few things like that.
What was Novation reconciled towards the end of his life, or he died out of communion?
We don't really know for sure, and so we can't say for sure that he was reconciled. I wish we could, but he was a brilliant theologian, and everything he wrote up until the schism is solidly orthodox. But then his ecclesiology was just such that he wanted to excommunicate everybody, and that wasn't going to fly. And then he became an anti-pope, and it was all downhill from there. So it's very sad. But this is one of the reasons why I say, schism is never a good idea. Schism is always bad. And, for a lot of the church fathers, they came to the conclusion that schism is the unforgivable sin. Schism is the worst mortal sin you can commit, to create a schism. So I kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, it has really enduring effects, so that does make sense. So David is asking, what kind of cost is associated with making a trip like this?
Yeah, it depends how you do it. My people usually for my 2 weeks, they usually end up paying between $3,500 and $4,000, and that's not including airfare.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, it's going to be $5,000 or $6,000, but that's because, we go to restaurants where people get to order off the menu. Whereas, if you book a package tour, nothing wrong with those, but a lot of times what you get is sort of, more cafeteria food. So you're all eating in the hotel restaurant where you're all eating the same thing. So they save a lot of money on the food. So you don't really get to experience the food as much. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I do mine as a walking tour, so I don't have to pay for a bus every day.
Yeah.
But some of the tours, I would say, if you can find a Catholic you trust who leads tours, that would be the way to go. But yeah, they're not cheap, because Rome is one of the vacation destinations that's both most sought after for Christians and non-Christians, but also still the most safe, one of the most safest places you can go. And so for that reason, I mean, everybody wants to come here, so it's not cheap. And right now, everyone whose trip was postponed during COVID, well, they're all here now. So it's crazy.
Martin is asking, how can I explain to a non-Catholic that church fathers are a reliable source of Christian beliefs and it's beneficial to read them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I usually start with the Bible. Like, ask people if they believe in the Bible, and they'll tell you they do. And then point out that there's one thing in everybody's Bible that's not in Scripture. It's the table of contents, right? So, like, if you trust the Bible, why do you trust the table of contents? Why do you trust, in other words, who are you trusting to tell you which documents are Scripture? Well, the church fathers are the ones who decided what books would make it into the Bible, and they are the ones who determined which documents are authoritative. And so, not that we would say we would not say the church fathers are infallible in the way that Scripture is, but that we should at least trust them enough to give them a reading, because if they are the ones who chose the documents of Scripture for us, wouldn't we want to know how they interpreted Scripture? Wouldn't we want to know what they thought the Bible meant in any given passage? And that's kind of how I go at it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's all of the questions in the chat. I appreciate y'all putting those in there and asking your questions. Dr. Jim, any parting words, any concluding thoughts you wanted to offer?
I wrote some notes here, but I think we covered it all. Like I said before, I really think everybody should come to Rome if they can. I just love to see people reconnect or connect for the first time with the historic faith. If you're Catholic, connect with your ancestors in the faith. You can come here and, whoever your favorite saint is, they're either buried here or there's a church named after them here or something. There's a relic or something. If you're not Catholic, then I would say to non-Catholics, we all share the same ancestors in the faith. And it's like the letter to the Hebrews says, there's this great cloud of witnesses, and I always say, forget the cloud on your phone, connect with the real cloud, the cloud of witnesses, the intercession of the saints, the communion of the saints. That's the cloud you want to connect with. And for those who are fortunate enough to be able to do it, coming to Rome is a really concrete, life-changing way to do that,
I love that. Connect with the cloud of saints rather than the cloud.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good one. I'm gonna have to start using that. I'm gonna steal that.
You can use it. You can use it. It's fine.
Tracy says, excellent talk. People are saying, thank you so much for your time. Yvonne says, thank you for taking time to share with us. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Jim. I know you're a busy man and you have a busy schedule, but thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us while you're there in Rome. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. My pleasure. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I'll get back to posting videos on the Original Church YouTube channel and get back to my locals community. And so if people want to check that out, love to have you.
Put in a plug for your book on the church fathers too, by the way.
Well, let's see. The latest book is Reading Scripture Like the Early Church, 7 Insights from the Church Fathers to help you understand the Bible. And the book I'm writing now is Praying Like the Early Church. So that'll come out one of these days. So check it out.
Yeah, I wasn't aware you're running that. That's exciting. Whenever you're done with it, I'd love to have you on the show to talk about it.
Oh, we will, definitely. No doubt.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank y'all for watching. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this on your social media. We'll see you later. God bless.
All
So
right,
Reason
thanks.
in Theology is growing as a channel. As a result, there's been a number of increases in production costs. So if you're benefiting from RNT, I ask that you consider supporting the channel. You can help out by contributing to the Help RNT Grow fundraiser on GoFundMe. You could also consider becoming a member on Patreon at patreon.com/Reason in Theology, or become a channel member right here on YouTube. With either of these options, Patreon or a YouTube member, you'll get extra access to patron-only content. You can also donate directly to RNT at PayPal if you prefer that option. And you can find links to all of these resources and ways to support RNT in the show description. God bless.